And now for more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangat, the former military secretary to 3 Israeli defense ministers and former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, and international affairs analyst Dan Perry, the author of the newsletter Ask Questions Later, and the former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, and our senior Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osarain. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Some momentous decisions are being made right now as we speak. And again, we will be going live to the White House when there is, in fact, a press conference. But right now, Ariel, I want to start with you. Much debate, much concern, many questions around this 21-point plan. What are the main deal breakers, the red lines that you are hearing about right now from your sources?
Well, ultimately, the original iteration of this plan had red lines on both sides. This plan was presented by President Trump to the Arab leaders on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last week. They presented their amendments. Now, in terms of the red lines for Israel, this deal would see the reintroduction of the Palestinian Authority to the Gaza Strip. You can call it whatever you want, but if this is, even if it's a committee of technocrats, they answer to the Palestinian Authority. The security force that is going to police the Gaza Strip, we're talking about 10,000 Palestinian Authority security personnel who are currently being trained by the Egyptians on Egyptian soil to assume that role. Under the Trump plan, there will be an international, predominantly Arab peacekeeping force, but they are going to be following the amendments presented by the Arab leaders. They're going to be on the borders of the Gaza Strip, not in the population centers, not in interaction with the civilian population. That is going to be left to the Palestinian Authority security guards. And we remember throughout the entire war, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, no Abbas, no Hamas. This appears to go against that. On the Hamas side, in terms of the red lines, this proposal does not include, currently, again, all we know is based on media leaks. This does not include a specific timeline for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. Doesn't have all the assurances that Hamas would like that Israel will not resume the war. And it goes against what Hamas has vowed throughout the entire war, that they will not release the hostages, let alone all of them, before Israeli forces leave the Gaza Strip. So we are seeing red lines on both sides. However, I will note that on the Israeli side, at least, yes, the no Abbas, no Hamas was a stated position on the part of Prime Minister Netanyahu. But if we're looking at the official cabinet-mandated stated goals of the war, this deal does answer all of them. It stipulates the return of all the hostages within the first 48 hours. It is conditioned, the entire proposal is conditioned by Hamas relinquishing governance over the Gaza Strip, which is a war goal, and Hamas disarming. Now, following the amendments presented by the Arab leaders, the wording has been changed from disarmament to Hamas laying down their weapons. It is not clear where they're going to lay them down and who's going to look after them. But this does address that issue. And so we are seeing that this is an attempt by President Trump to allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to sell this to the Israeli public by achieving the stated goals of the war. But there were also the other goals or other positions that were throughout the war that will be politically challenged for Prime Minister Netanyahu to sell to the public. But as for the red lines, I think this deal does address many of the red lines that Israel has presented throughout this war.
And of course, when you talk about the Israeli public, the nation is waiting for 48 hostages to be returned back home, 20 of whom are believed to be alive. Security concerns, security guarantees remain top of mind for most people across the region. Your concerns, Eitan?
I think that, first of all, we are in a can be dramatic evening from all the sides. It's like 360 degrees around us. Nothing should not surprise us, but one thing for me is the majority of the chances for a change tonight, because Trump cannot allow himself to fail after what he did in the last 2 weeks. The issue or the fact that the number one leaders from the Arab countries around him are in the United States, around this table, make with him discussions. The last is Bibi Netanyahu, shows that he really put the all effort and he will not be failed under all the things that you organize. Secondly, I think, if you ask me, the top 5, we cannot talk about 21 issues. We can sit here, talk 3 hours about many issues, but one, the main important things, whether we are going to see back home the hostages and to see those who are alive, those who are not alive, how many Hamas able to bring us back, and under all is the second, the top issue, is whether Hamas, how it's going to respond, because it's not by mistake that Hamas is not a partner, what you see. The partners are Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and all the other, and Saudi Arabia, and Hamas, they're expecting and will demand from Hamas to do what they order for him. So Hamas agreed or not agreed is reduced dramatic tonight because it is Arab countries with Israel. The third issue, whether, and this will be a great, unfortunately, a failure for us, whether we are going to see Turkey in Gaza, whether we are going to see Qatar in Gaza, and the last, but not the least, because I promised top 5 issues here, to see a very important question concerning the Israeli government in the coming months after such agreement, whether it will be.
We'll take a deeper look at the political implications for the decisions that Benjamin Netanyahu might be announcing very shortly. But first, Dan, I'd like your take. Did you ever think you'd hear a report that the Prime Minister of Israel would be making a phone call to the Emir of Qatar to apologize for targeting Hamas leaders inside Doha? Your insights?
It clearly shows that he'll do whatever Trump demands of him to do. And did I ever think it might be? It is not in Netanyahu's DNA to apologize. Netanyahu is a man who doubles down. I don't think I've once heard him express regret about any aspect of any action he's ever taken on any issue. So it is, I suppose, in the very fact that this is unprecedented, there is hope that other surprising and unprecedented things might happen to me.
Well, we're certainly going to be unpacking all those announcements, surprising or not. It certainly is likely to happen very soon.
I have to say, I find myself wondering if Trump apologized, because I don't believe for a second that Netanyahu would have taken this act without American acquiescence. So I think perhaps many things were said in that room that we may not find about right away.
Well, that conversation is continuing right now as we speak. And again, when there is a press conference, we will go live to the White House. Gentlemen, stay with us. There's much more to discuss. But first, I want to check in with our correspondent, Joe Brown. He joins us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And we know this agonizing wait continues for the families of the 48 hostages still in terror captivity. And the Hostage Families Forum sent a letter to Donald Trump thanking the U.S. president for his efforts to free the hostages and asking, in effect, Joe, that he make sure to seal this latest deal. What more can you tell us?
Well, this is one of many appeals from the hostage family members to President Donald Trump, as they believe that he is the only person who is able to pressure Benjamin Netanyahu into a deal. And what we have just seen with the Qatari phone call, with Donald Trump being on the line with Benjamin Netanyahu as he seemingly apologized to the Qatari Prime Minister, this is proof that this is the only way for it to actually happen, for Trump to pressure Netanyahu, for him to go with his tail in between his legs. I remember just last week when he was asked about the Qatari strike, and he said that this wasn't a mistake, this wasn't a failure, that this was to show that Hamas should be wary of Israel, who is willing to strike wherever. So, as Dan said, whether this is actually an apology from him or whether he's just wanting to say what Trump wants him to say so that he can get a deal and keep Trump in his good books, that remains to be seen. But the hostage family members, I'm sure they don't really care. They've been saying to me, to you, Benita, as well. We've spoken to family members of hostages dozens of times over the last couple of years, and the amount of times that they've been told by the media, even by Donald Trump himself, that a deal is close, it's lost all meaning to them. Whenever they say that there's going to be a deal within 2 weeks, we wait 2 weeks and nothing's happened. We will then wait another 2 weeks after Trump would say it again and nothing's happened. But now it finally seems as if something is occurring in DC right now between the Israeli side and the Hamas side, and whether a deal can be announced when Trump and Netanyahu speak later this evening, it remains to be seen. But it's something that the families have been pushing for so long, and if Donald Trump finally gets up on that stage, or even later on Truth Social, and says that there is a deal that has been signed, I'm sure this will come as a huge relief for those family members, those who have family members who are alive in captivity, the 20 of them, the family members of 2 who there are concerns on their life, and of 26 who have been confirmed killed in captivity. I'm sure all of them would breathe a massive sigh of relief if a deal is announced.
And of course, adding to the agonizing weight are reports like recent reports in which Hamas suggested it had lost contact with the captors of 2 of the hostages. Of course, there's no way for Israel to confirm if that is in fact true, or if it's just another part of the cruel psychological terror, a strategy that has been playing out for nearly 2 years now.
Yes, we saw this yesterday, and we saw this straight away with the fact that the Hostage Family Forum released another statement after that, urging Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Israel Katz to stop the operations in the Gaza Strip so that Hamas could, as they claimed, extract 2 hostages who had been stuck under the rubble. Now, whether this is just Hamas lying for the sake of lying to try and get Israel, the Israeli public, to add further pressure onto the Prime Minister to accept a deal, or even to pressure Donald Trump to get Netanyahu to accept the deal before time runs out, we can't say for certain. But the likeness of this actually being the case, it's very dubious. We saw it when Idan Alexander was about to get released just a couple of months ago, and Hamas kept saying that they lost contact with him, and then they released videos of him saying that they had got him again. This is something that they do. This is part of their tactic, and the fact that this enraged the Families Forum to put out that statement last night shows that these kinds of propaganda tactics, these techniques, they work. They make the Israeli public feel, because the Israeli public has got this sort of parasocial relationship with the hostages. The family members, of course, want their loved ones back. So all in all, by putting the pressure on the Israeli people to make a stance, it shows that it's working.
Correspondent Joe Brown, live from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for the update. We will be coming back to Joe, of course, in the coming hours. And talking from diplomatic pressure to military pressure. And Eitan Dangot, we know Gaza City is the focus of much tension right now, much concern about what this military pressure means, for the hostages who could be there right now. And of course, there were reports that they would be brought to the surface from the tunnels as part of the strategy of using hostages as human shields. What are your thoughts right now as we watch to see what is happening in Washington, announcements that could be made as this military pressure intensifies?
You know, be honest, when I enter to this studio tonight and everything is around the meeting of Bibi Netanyahu, I thought about the thousands of soldiers that are now in the middle of fighting around Gaza, especially the main effort of the IDF is inside the Gaza city, and the fights are there. And when we are discussing about opportunities and what and how to do, and the time clock is running, we are very close to say 2 years of a war, and we are very close to say whether there are 20 life hostages or not, about the last statement that was yesterday declared by Hamas. It means that the circumstances in the ground are very foggy, very difficult. The IDF is fighting when already Hamas has been brought to a very down or difficult situation under guerrilla movement from being an army. And the big question mark is whether we really didn't miss a time in do it earlier instead of coming for tonight. And I may say that the unclear situation or information concerning life hostages in the last days is very, I think, true, because you cannot know while you are maneuvering and you have the intelligence what the other side is doing with 2, 3 hostages, especially while they're escaping or getting other to bring them especially to the front line in order to make psychological pressure of the Israeli. So it's very unclear, very foggy, and very serious situation, because when you are fighting, it's much more danger than you are talking with suits and knives and everything under these circumstances. And this is the reason why I think the Israeli government should be much more rapidly reaction towards the opportunity that already has been raised a year ago or more in Gaza Strip. Because if you check the situation today in Gaza, we are taking 800,000 people left Gaza. So what? Last March 24, February 24, it was the same numbers that left Gaza City. Why within that time the government didn't agree about such a step concerning the Hamas, while you can achieve it and continue the war? Even now, when we are stopping, I'm not optimistic that immediately will be quiet. Look what is going in Lebanon. This is another situation with Hezbollah, and I'm sure that our war with Hamas or with such a movement will continue in the coming years.
Dan.
You know, I've been a critic of this war for much of the period, and I advised in favor of accepting the Biden exit plan, even in December 2023, which would have given Israel a whole bunch of advantages, peace with Saudi Arabia possibly, and so forth. But I'm not sure that Israel could have gotten the terms of this deal back then, because Israel wanted not just the return of the hostages and an end to Hamas's governance in Gaza, which Hamas has been offering for almost 2 years. Israel wanted Hamas to disarm. Now, Hamas has not been offering to disarm. They have agreed to hand over the keys to the strip to the Palestinian Authority already many months ago, but they have been holding out on agreeing to disarm, which is why, to me, what we're seeing in Washington is not yet a done deal, because if Netanyahu has a shred of strategic acumen, they will agree to this deal, even though, yes, it makes it politically difficult for his coalition because of the PA's role, which is, by the way, inevitable. It had to be. But they boxed themselves in with a ridiculous demonization of the PA. No, he probably will agree. I'm willing to predict that in one form or another. But then I'm not sure Hamas agrees. If Hamas does agree, that's massively dramatic, because it is the first time they've agreed to disarm. Then, of course, you need to verify, and there's a lot of the devil's in the details. But Hamas's goal throughout had been to remain in the former Hezbollah role as a militia that dominates the PA and kind of calls the shots, even though they're no longer formally in power. And this deal, as I read it, denies them this. And if that happens, if this really happens, if Qatari pressure, for example, succeeds in breaking their back this way to get them to agree, then that's a dramatic victory for Israel that had not hitherto been on the table.
One can imagine that right now, President Donald Trump, having put pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to make a call to the Emir of Qatar, is also putting some level of pressure on the Qataris as we speak.
Almost for sure.
Yeah, just to comment on what Dan said, Hamas is saying this evening, just in the past half hour, Tyler Nunu, one of the senior Hamas officials who was targeted in that meeting in Doha and survived along with the rest of the negotiating delegation, he's not only reiterating that they have not yet seen the proposal, however, throughout the day they've said that they will demand amendments and safeguards for various points of the deal, but they hadn't seen it yet. Tyler Nunu telling Qatari Al Arabi TV that the issue of disarmament, saying that, quote, the resistance weapons are tied to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, this is very interesting because it would indicate a shift in the messaging. Until now, they've said that there's no talking about disarmament. Now they're saying it's linked to a Palestinian state that they need to be part of. There's a few problems to that. One, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said Hamas will not be part of the next government and will not be included in the elections. And similarly to Lebanon, where the Gulf countries said they're not going to see a single dollar from the Gulf without the disarmament of Hezbollah. I made that Freudian mistake because that is what they're also saying with regards to Hamas. This is a new reality, new pressure coming from the Gulf. However, I think this pounding on the chest coming from Hamas is something that we are expected to see. But as was said earlier here, they are not part of this deal. This is a Israeli, American, Qatari negotiation. You have a Qatari delegation in Washington. You had this phone call with the Prime Minister of Qatar. Qatar funds Hamas. Qatar kept the hostages in the hands of Hamas. And now it's going to be the Qataris who are telling Hamas, hand over the keys to the Gaza Strip, you're done.
And disarm. Look, I have to say that in Israel, there has been too much indifference to the Arab League call from 2 months ago for Hamas to disarm. That was a first, and Qatar joined that call. So Qatar has been easing its way into the camp of rational players in the world that understands that nothing good can come to the Middle East and nor to the Palestinians unless Hamas disarms, not just hands over power. Now, their ability to control Hamas will be tested because you'll hear a lot of different theories about Hamas's degree of supplicancy to Qatar. You'll hear some people say Qatar dominates everything and they're the terrorist sponsoring state. Others will say something else entirely. We will see. It will be tested. If Qatar signs on to this deal and we can see that Trump is wooing them like nobody's business, with this apology that he forced Netanyahu to eat humble pie about, with including them in all the discussions and deliberations, with the praise that he heaps upon the Emir of Qatar, with a call to the Emir of Qatar today. If Qatar signs on to this deal and Hamas still says no, that would be interesting. And I frankly don't know which way that's going to go.
I might say that I agreed with the things, but there is a great change tonight because Qatar, I think, made its own assessment concerning its situation because they were moving from the main core of the middle of the first circle outside to the second, to the third circle. They come a new partner, Saudi Arabia, was out completely. And Saudi Arabia bring one condition. We are not coming without the Palestinian authorities. And this is something like by equal forces between Qatar and Saudi Arabia. I think it's a very clever negotiation that was led by Donald Trump people to make such balance between those countries from the Arab League at all and brought them to circumstances that it's not Hamas whether yes or no. It means Qatar yes or no dominant or Saudi Arabia and a new player, unfortunately, Turkey come as a partner. Not enough they are now in Syria, very close to Lebanon. They are coming from Gaza. So on one end, it's a very way of the American policy. On the other end, I don't think it's very good to Israel when you analyze. But you know what I'm doing tonight? I'm thinking about two things. Hostages, Israeli IDF, which is fighting and has a lot of achievements during the last 2 years. And for me, after getting back the hostages, organizing the IDF, I'm sure that we will be able to continue of each of these developments.
Ariel?
I want to issue a sign of warning that this isn't based on any concrete intelligence, but I am hearing whispers that as this deal could potentially move through, we're forgetting one of the main nefarious actors in the region, and that is Iran. And they're not going to want to see Israel capitalize on this, use this momentum, and go back to integration in the region, expanding the Abraham Accords. I am not going to be surprised if this indeed plan moves forward and there is agreement that we will not see some nefarious activity coming from Iran with or without Hezbollah. I think it is not for a good reason that Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, visited Lebanon twice in 2 months. Back in the heydays of the Iranian axis, you didn't see that much of Iranian security officials traveling to Lebanon. And so this is something that needs to be in the back of mind. To my understanding, this is something that Israel is aware of the security establishment, but this is something that we need to be cognizant of because ultimately what led to what was at the backdrop of the October 7th attacks was the expected normalization with Saudi Arabia. This could be once again on the table. And again, I don't think the Iranians are going to simply sit back and watch this play out in Israel's favor as the region shifts against them.
Ariel, what could it be? What are the fears? An invasion by a terrorist group in Jordan? What nefarious activity could they
Look, ultimately, we have to look at the rhetoric coming out of Iran on a daily basis, saying that they've developed their missile capabilities. We've even seen test firing of new ballistic missiles. We're seeing in Lebanon, Hezbollah is in a very precarious situation.
Yeah.
And in order to divert public attention or even try and convince the Lebanese public that they're needed, they could instigate some flare-up with Israel. I'm just saying this is something that needs to be in the back of our mind, that this is a possibility that could erupt before our eyes in the coming future.
Ariel, after the failure of Israel on the last attack in Doha, concerning trying to targeting the Hamas leadership, you saw Iran running inside the Arab League table and fulfill a major task again, trying to return back. What's happening tonight is a big red color for Iran, because Iran understands that if it succeeds, that the Arab League unity against Iran is returning back. And this is my conclusion. On the other end, I think that I'm thinking a different way. From the other side of the stick, United States, Israel will have the right time now to deal with Iran to complete what they stopped after 12 days. And that can be a thing to achieve by diplomatic way, by other ways at all. I think that Iranian is fully now, it's not enough time for Iran to be again on a capacity with missiles. Even China is giving them the support. And from the nuclear situation that Russia supported them, Iran will feel very close to the war with their back after, if there is a stop of the war, that will close the Iranian program and policy that has been built for thousands of years, that starts with Hezbollah, ended with Hamas. If it ended, I say if, because we have to be very careful, it means for Iran a failure for its proxy big program, and coming back to directly to deal with them with the
failure has already happened.
The failures happen, and Eitan, what you're describing, that's rational thinking, and I agree with you. But ultimately, we have to remember, what situation is Iran in now? The sanctions have been reimposed. Their economy is about to go in a lot worse situation than it is right now. They need, there's growing internal tensions and displeasure with the government. And so to divert the public attention from their expected economic calamities, this is how the regime thinks.
I do not think,
to instigate an external conflict. And I think Hezbollah might catch on to this, and this is a Hezbollah without Nasrallah, that might make the mistake that Nasrallah didn't make on October 7th, and that was to go all in.
You saw Naim Qassam, the successor of Nasrallah, talking a few days ago on the day of Nasrallah joining the area of the sky. He looks weak, he looks bad, he looks that he shows on his face the situation of Hezbollah. I'm talking about Hezbollah with very seriously looking. They have till now a military power, but if they want to destroy themselves towards the end and to destroy what they built since 82 to 84, I think they will make a great mistake now in this situation.
Eitan, what is the purpose of Hezbollah? They were the insurance policy of Iran, but Nasrallah didn't want to assume that role. He took into consideration the various issues and challenges in Lebanon, and again, he did not go all in on October 7th, but named Qassem, he's a lot weaker, and he may not have that internal power to stand against Iran, that they are in existential threat, and they need to exact that insurance policy.
There was a very clear mistake committed by the United States in the aftermath of the 12-day war, when Iran was on its back foot. And at that point, they should have insisted on terms of surrender, which would have involved an abdication of the proxy militia project, an end to the ballistic missile project, and of course, a promise, which they do anyway, that they will not pursue nuclear weapons, but also not nuclear enrichment. That was attainable back then. And unfortunately, Trump, in his hubris, because he wanted credit for quote-unquote obliterating everything already, decided that they don't need a deal. And Iran indeed has had time to maybe collect its wits a little bit and maybe dream once more of trying to return to the status quo ante. But I actually am somewhat optimistic that their hand has been stayed. They were revealed in that 12-day war to be something of a paper tiger, whose skies were completely at the mercy of the Israeli Air Force and then, of course, the American Air Force. The legitimacy, whatever legitimacy the countries of the region were prepared to grant Iran for interfering in their own sovereignty with militias like Hezbollah, is now gone. And the main test for Iran is if they can somehow keep Hezbollah alive in Lebanon. And as you yourself just said, the Gulf countries are conditioning any assistance to Lebanon on that being resolved. I fear Lebanon may have to actually risk some version of a small civil war with Hezbollah, because the world at large has understood that these proxy militias are no longer acceptable and certainly not sustainable.
Talking of Gulf nations, I want to pivot a little bit to the prospect of West Bank annexation and what the call for that move right now, particularly given the Palestinian recognition. We saw the wave happening in recent days. We saw the reaction from Benjamin Netanyahu. Your thoughts on what that could mean right now? How does the call for some kind of annexation by the right wing, by the settler movement, impact the decisions that Benjamin Netanyahu is making as we speak in the White House?
It's another case of the right wing or the far right in Israel being impractical and indifferent to the consequences of actions. Israel's just witnessed a pretty big diplomatic disaster with about 10 countries recognizing Palestine in the entirety of the West Bank. Obviously, Israel's position needs to be that the borders must be negotiated. When Israel finally has a rational government that understands that some diplomatic solution is needed in West Bank, it'll be important to negotiate the borders so it isn't all of the West Bank, but right now it is. So if Israel does what I suspect is Netanyahu's perhaps instinct, and to do a little annexation of a small territory that is somewhat an Israeli consensus, let's say the Etzion bloc just south of Jerusalem, they'll try to present that as no big deal because everyone knows the Etzion bloc will remain in Israel in a future negotiated settlement. But what it will absolutely do is put Israel immediately at loggerheads with much of the world. And I would submit that after 2 years of this war, with all the isolation Israel has endured, with the legal complications, with the economic difficulties, maybe it's time to take the win and not initiate another conflict with, the UK. Maybe that's a bad idea. What good could come of it? Pretty sure the answer is nothing. Because Israel rules these territories without any difficulty, without the formality of an annexation.
Ariel.
I think it's a little more than just putting itself at odds with the world. It is a direct threat to the Abraham Accords. And
Yes.
the members have stated as such. The Emiratis have said openly that it's a red line.
And it would guarantee no peace or settlement.
But the Emiratis aren't alone. I'm hearing from sources in the Gulf, Saudi source close to the royal court, that it's not just the Emiratis. If Israel moves forward with annexing parts of the West Bank, even a small sliver, not only the UAE will withdraw from the Abraham Accords, but Bahrain, Morocco will follow suit. And rather than expanding the circle of peace, it will be completely collapsing on Israel's head.
If I may make a few remarks. First of all, I think that we are here after, in my opinion, a big mistake of the Israeli authorities not to come to the day after much more earlier. Because if we declare, or taking, for example, the Jordan Valley, and declares it was a great opportunity to close the area from the east and say, we are taking the Jordan Valley and declare it as an Israeli land. It was supposed to be passed without such an earthquake like it should be now. Secondly, the fact that we are now, for Bibi Netanyahu, don't be right, be smart. The situation concerning Israel as a state now, that all the pressure, the boycotts everywhere, and the problem that is great achievement of Abraham Agreement under circumstances of can be cancelled, make him to understand that now make something with the West Bank, it will be a great, not only a mistake, it will react steps by others that are not also willing to do it now.
There's one thing that has to be said, though. I obviously, mistakes by this government, generally speaking, wouldn't surprise me. But in this case, I'm optimistic that it will not occur because the political timeline has shifted. It's widely understood that the coalition will fall apart in December to March. There's a process there. Elections will be held probably in June, about 5 months earlier than expected. And Netanyahu, I think, knows that it's not a winning strategy for him to arrive at the elections with Israel still at loggerheads, with the entire planet, with academics being boycotted, with Israel being expelled from not just UEFA, but maybe the European Union Association Agreement. None of that is an electoral winner. So up until now, Netanyahu has obviously been terrified of the coalition falling apart. At this point, when it's going to end anyway pretty soon, a far more dramatic need is to appease the Israeli public, who, just so we remember, are fed up with the war. About 70% of the people or more in every poll say they want the war to end, and there is no majority for annexing the West Bank in whole or in part.
The majority of Israelis want the war to end. They also want to know that what happened on the 7th of October can never, ever happen again.
In order to do that, you need a National Commission of Inquiry. When this coalition that Dan describes its days are numbered, has twice kicked the can down the road. And I think we're 4 months away from the next time that they can vote whether to include it or not. Obviously, and this is going to be, in my opinion, key going into the next elections, that this government still hasn't been held fully accountable and even done the soul searching as for the causes of October 7th. We're just 1 week ahead from the 2-year mark, and with Israel in its longest war ever. Before this war, we were talking about 2 months, I think a little bit less than that. So Israelis are in an unprecedented situation. Not only is the population still reeling from the worst attack in its history, but you still have this open wound of the hostages. And so you have these two processes. One, the bringing back the hostages so that not only the families, the hostages themselves, of course, but the families can begin the rehabilitation and recovery process. But Israel as a society needs that to happen in order to start looking forward. But the other obstacle for that rehabilitation and recovery process is looking straight in the eye into the mistakes, seeing what happened, what needs to be done to prevent that moving forward. This is something that the Israeli public is not going to let go anytime soon.
Netanyahu is going to appoint, I'm almost sure, a government inquiry commission. Now, viewers, this may seem a little bit in the weeds, but it's very important. Every disaster in Israel's history, pretty much, led to a national commission of inquiry that was headed by a Supreme Court judge. Netanyahu has been demonizing the Supreme Court and has stated more than once that no judges could possibly be fair to the government, and therefore the government has to be allowed to investigate itself. The next big discussion will be when they try to appoint such a commission. Will that satisfy public opinion in Israel? It will fool some people. The question is whether enough.
You know when that didn't happen? When the worst civilian tragedy, not security, civilian tragedy happened in Israel. The Meron tragedy. Also, then there was not a National Commission of Inquiry.
I think that we should give the time to prove the power of the people in the streets, and that will be demand. But secondly, I would like to add another remark. We talk about the two-state solution and what is raising. I think Israel should be very tough, to be very clear that this issue, even it's on maybe the 21 points of Trump, should be, because it's demand of the Saudi Arabia, and without it, they should not come to the option for this deal. I think for Israel, it will be very clear and will be understood that it should be the end of the list, because you said, well, we are going to prevent any 7th of October. Or the first is no two-state solution till Gaza is disarmed from Hamas, armed, and there be a movement which can create threat to Israel. Secondly, also in order in the West Bank as well. Third is not to allow any kind of rebuild Gaza again without this arm of Hamas. So, okay, we can maybe discuss it, But from my point of view as an Israeli, it is on the long way to discuss it under few demands from Israel. So I'm not really think that Israel, never matter if the Gates government that led by Netanyahu or the others, non-governmental Israel should agree to open such discussions in this situation without seeing Hamas disappear from Gaza, without seeing the West Bank in a new way of leadership by the PA, without looking and seeing the new opportunity structure in Gaza itself by Tony Blair or someone else that will be responsible.
You know, the PA has already agreed that Palestine can be demilitarized, which is a key
President Abbas has said that consistently.
central Israeli demand. The main problem is going to be Jerusalem. I've heard various optimistic scenarios about how that's handled, and I've never been convinced. And history so far has proven my pessimism correct. It has always collapsed on basically on the issue of Jerusalem in the Old City.
Another issue that has collapsed is on the right of return. And President
about the
Mahmoud,
right of return.
Well, if you look at the key on the suit of Mahmoud Abbas, it is addressed to the UN General Assembly, which was recorded, shows that they're not going to abandon that so easily, at least publicly. But very interesting, right now we're receiving the readout of the phone call, the three-way phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Trump, and the Qatari Prime Minister, Mohammed El Thani. This was a full apology. Netanyahu pledged not to attack Qatar again, saying that he refused to completely and fully say, discussing all three leaders together. This, to my opinion, was the actual negotiation this evening. Not Trump, Netanyahu, but Trump, Netanyahu, Prime Minister El Thani, according to the readout published now by the White House. The leaders discussed a proposal for ending the war in Gaza, the prospects for a more secure Middle East, and President Trump praised both leaders for their willingness to take steps forward toward greater cooperation in the interest of peace and security for all. This readout addresses Qatar as the other side of the negotiation, which is something that we've discussed throughout this broadcast. And so it is very possible that this has just been the document that signifies that there has been an agreement reached. Obviously, we have to wait to the announcements in the press conference.
If Hamas makes them look like chumps?
Well, they're hosted in hotels in Doha.
So they'll kick out.
They'll have to pay the bill.
Yeah.
And I don't think the Hamas wants to pay the bill, and I think they also don't want to pay the shuttle fee to their next destination, which is likely to happen under this agreement.
I want to discuss what that next destination could look like for those who are wanting exile, so to speak. If you're just joining us now, this is special coverage. The US president is meeting right now with Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House. We are expecting them to hold a joint press conference very shortly. You can see the podiums on your screen right now. They are discussing Washington's plan for ending the war in Gaza, a 21-point plan that has already been presented to Arab leaders. We've been discussing the details and the implications here in studio. Of course, as soon as this press conference starts, we will take you live to DC. Ariel.
Yeah, Eitan was talking here about the two groups that he is thinking of today, the hostages and the soldiers. The IDF publishing now that four soldiers, an IDF officer in the medical corps and three other soldiers in the armored corps were injured, severely injured during combat in the northern Gaza Strip. They've been evacuated to hospitals to receive medical treatment, and their families have been notified. So as Eitan very aptly described here, we're talking about diplomatic achievements and prospect for the future. But this is an actual war that is happening right now as we speak. And we have the hostages in the tunnels or above ground who are suffering at Hamas's torture. And we have Israeli soldiers putting their lives in danger to defend the Israeli public. And unfortunately, 4 of them were injured this evening in battle.
It's exactly what you were describing earlier on in the broadcast,
Of course, and we don't have any insurance. We talk about Gaza City. We saw what happened in the Rafah. We saw what happened in other areas. When you are handling such area as Gaza, while the enemy was beaten by the Israeli troops and is underground and is using guerrilla and charges or anti-tank missiles, while you are coming with power, it means that the soldiers under a threat that such a thing is directly, especially in these moments. And while we are looking about what are the goals of the activities of IDF, okay, we will continue to beat Hamas, but we are in a situation that the IDF already supplied to the Israeli government, to the cabinet, opportunities to close this circle and also under the two main goals that Israel already declared for a long time. First, to beat Hamas, to defeat Hamas. Secondly, to release of the hostages. But till it's not ending, it's not ending. It means that Bibi Netanyahu, under his decisions, has to listen also to the voice of thousands of mothers that are not sleeping for 2 years, and also for the reserve and all the others. And we have to calculate with a lot of responsibility concerning what and how we are doing the things, even for the hostages. And that's what I meant. We are already with open areas in Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Houthis, and also we can say with Iran. So it means 6 to 7 arenas are really open under war for more, they are very close to 2 years.
I have to say this, we're trying to figure out the likely scenarios here. And I think we agree that Israel will probably accept this plan. We are not sure if Hamas is going to accept the plan. And the question then arises, if indeed Hamas doesn't really go along with this, even if Qatar pressures them, what happens then? And I suspect what happens then is Trump will be in a state of rage and Israel will get carte blanche to do whatever it wants in Gaza. And the likelihood there is a lot more brutality still, massive isolation of Israel in the coming months and maybe longer, and the establishment of a military administration in Gaza to rule over 2 million people, and the entry into a prolonged guerrilla war with the remnants of Hamas. That is a very, very dark scenario, and I'm not so sure that the local leadership of Hamas, which doesn't exactly answer to Qatar or the exterior leadership of Hamas, it isn't prepared to go down this route, because as I've described it, many listeners might be comprehending that it's bad for Israel. It's not attractive for Israel. It's also bad for the Palestinian public. But I haven't noticed that Hamas cares particularly much about the Palestinian public.
I just want to correct myself. In the incident that I said earlier in the Gaza Strip, 2 officers and 3 soldiers, so 5 IDF troops were severely injured in this attack on what appears to be a defensive position inside the Gaza Strip, a forward position of the IDF attacked by Hamas. This is a MO that Hamas has employed in recent weeks, going after IDF positions, outposts inside the Gaza Strip. Just the other day, they published footage of their attack on August 20th as a major success. 20 terrorists emerging from a tunnel, attacking one of these posts, injuring 3 soldiers. 8 of them, 8 Hamas terrorists, were killed. And in the video, they show, this is the Hamas video that shows them emerging from the tunnels carrying arms in civilian clothing, which is admitting to a war crime for all to see, and trying to boast at this failed attack as a success. This is what guerrilla warfare has come down to. And unfortunately, we've seen this latest example this evening with 5 IDF soldiers in critical condition.
And of course, earlier on in the day, 2 rockets were launched from northern Gaza at Nahal Oz. That was earlier today. The rockets fell short, but it speaks to the fact that as this discussion continues in Washington right now, there is still an ability by Hamas and other terror groups to launch rockets towards civilians in Israel.
Yes, but maybe I will surprise you to tell you that I'm not so taking it as serious, because you cannot come to the last rocket or missile and to destroy it. We break the capacity and the power of Hamas by launching rockets, but they still has dozens of rockets here and there in the north part of Gaza, in the central part of Gaza, and they will try to use it to show their existence. But it's very clear from the military point of view, they are down. They are not able to produce. They are not able to make more than one or two. And as more as we are there, it's going to be closed. And the rockets issue is running towards the end of its capacity and its power. So what is much more bothers me is the underground tunnels that exist in Gaza, and dozens of kilometers are still exist. One of the main, I say, we are not going to talk, and that will be my recommendation to the Israeli government, don't talk anything about two-state solution till the tunnels are exploited, till the area is clean, till we finish the concept of the underground that Hamas built for the last 20 years.
And of course, let's not forget where that money came from, the money that was meant for
From
civilians
Qatar.
that ended up being used to build this extensive
that's the
terror
reason
network.
that Qatar felt that its existence in this kind of conflict is going to be a little bit bubbling if they continue to be outside of the picture. So they make their own assessment. Qatar will not disappear. Qatar is the main engine that create what we are facing in the United States, in the demonstrations, in Europe, in other places, under a very clever program they built.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Stay with us. We're going to be taking a very short break, but when we get back, the special coverage continues on this potentially monumental day, and we're hearing that there could be developments soon in Washington, so we're actually going to stay continuing with this conversation just in case these leaders do in fact come out. We don't want you to miss any part of the action, so to speak. Dan Perry, your thoughts on what we just heard?
Well, so Eitan is laying out his conditions for the beginning of a discussion on two-state solution, but implicit in that is that you would agree to a two-state solution if the outrages are removed. If there's no more tunnels, there's no more Hamas. But of course, we know what that leads to. I mean, and I also, we know that this half of...
my private opinion, I'm against a Palestinian state without here, there is no place for two states. There is a place to create something of autonomies in kind of economy or others. I think that one, as Hanita said, what will be the next 7th of October? One of my conditions, will not be a Palestinian state. But we have time to bring it to this situation. You can talk, but the result should be different.
Well, my point is that the Likud, half of Israel, basically rejects the very premise of a Palestinian state. You just suggested you do as well. I don't know your position. My position is that autonomy in islands of West Bank territory that are not contiguous does not absolve Israel of the demographic disaster of having there be a Jewish minority in the territory it effectively controls. The Bantustans in South Africa, not to compare, this is not apartheid, but the Bantustans did not persuade anyone that they're not ruled by South Africa. And similarly, islands of autonomy in the West Bank will not persuade anyone that the Palestinians aren't here under the boot of Israel. So the reality is Israel plus West Bank plus Gaza is 15 million people, of which slightly more than half are Arab Palestinians. And Israel needs to separate from them in some way that is permanent and decisive. Now, whether that is through the mechanism of a Palestinian state or something else, give land up to Jordan and Egypt, I do not know.
I really don't want to go deeper in this issue because, in my opinion, the important is the hostages, the IDF, to build our state again. But I'm telling you that from my experience, and believe me, I spoke many hours with Abu Mazen, 4 eyes, about this kind of things. Mahmoud Abbas. I don't find, even for the new generation, there will not be Palestinian leader that will say, I'm closing the conflict of my demand from the right of coming back to Israel.
I tend to
Don't worry, they will not agree more than you for the Palestinian state.
Well, which is why, by the way, Israel may have to not condition it on an end of conflict.
We also
I'm
need
basically
to talk,
saying Israel needs partition for demographic salvation.
we also need to talk about how one goes about de-radicalizing these regions, and that clearly would be a long-term project. Putting it mildly, Ariel, you wanted to chip in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add more from the readout of from the White House on the trilateral call between Trump, Netanyahu, and the Qatari Prime Minister, because there's some fascinating things that are addressed to exactly what we've discussed right here in studio. According to the readout, the leaders accepted President Trump's proposal to establish a trilateral mechanism to enhance coordination, improve communication, resolve mutual grievances, and strengthen collective efforts to prevent threats. They underscored their shared commitment to working together constructively and clearing away misconceptions while building on the long-standing ties both have with the United States. This is we all know the two-faced game that Qatar is playing, the arsonist and the firefighter. Here, this is a reward to their firefighting engagement, while completely neglecting to mention the pyromancy of their activity in the region, not only with Al Jazeera, that is not only served as the mouthpiece of Hamas, but undermines governments all over the region, but their funding of elements that undermine Western governments, not only in the region. This is a pure reward to their diplomatic terrorism, is I think a good way to put it. And they are bearing the fruit of their double game, which is proven in this statement by the White House.
The complication of the narrative, of course, is that Hamas was indeed funded by Qatar, but for years, but at the request of the government of Israel, which thought with catastrophic miscalculation that there is some benefit to Israel to have Hamas be in charge and pacified in Gaza because this divides the Palestinians.
That's how you don't have a Palestinian state.
Indeed, but we do have 1,200 people massacred on October 7th.
Indeed.
The darkest day in the history of the country. Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and former senior advisor, is also part of these meetings. Dan Perry, given your experience covering this region for so long, all the efforts towards peace over a long period of time, what does he bring to the table right now? We haven't heard his name for quite a while, and it's definitely back as we speak.
Kushner brings business ties, but also diplomatic ties with the Gulf countries, in particular the UAE, but not only. His presence is a source of some hope that not just the Qataris, but the Saudis are involved in this. And a Saudi umbrella over this whole process that partly is financial, could be very effective in essentially buying our way out of this entanglement with jihadist groups by creating a real incentive for the governments of the region. This includes the PA and whatever governments will be involved in rebuilding Gaza, but also Lebanon, to really take care of this problem. The Saudis have been very clear that the militia nonsense has to end, and I strongly suspect that Kushner's presence is related to this effort.
I may say that Kushner is the bridge that connected Gaza to the Abraham Agreement, that he was the architect for them at the past. He never left the area. He, together with Tony Blair, which was all the time in the circle of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel, the head of the quartet, they strengthened the team or the staff team of Trump in order to bring him the solution, the key that it can bring to the end by bringing Gaza, maybe the war to over the end release of the hostages, and connected the Arab countries, the moderate Arab countries, as I said, Saudi Arabia returned to the region, because when you look the opportunities for Saudi Arabia in Lebanon, in Syria, and now in Gaza, and they never give $1 in the last years, not to the PA and not, of course, to Hamas. Suddenly they are here, and they are like, let's say, the father of the PA today, especially on the number 2, Hussein Sheikh, that spent many days in Saudi Arabia recently. So I can divide between two camps. One is supported by Qatar, of course, Hamas. The second one, Saudi Arabia, which is the major player. And if you ask me where Israel direction should be, is moving towards Saudi Arabia, and there is no chance without the Palestinian authorities. And this is something that Bibi Netanyahu will have to decide. The present government, without the PA, it means to break what we see now or to adopt what we see now, to come to the Israeli population with its new agreement, new order, try to organize by its way of a new elections that he will try to continue to lead.
I see the contours of a possible deal where Israel drops its impossible and ill-advised demand, a boycott of the Palestinian Authority, which is the only brand in town and the only alternative to Hamas. And the Saudis, in return, stop insisting on Palestinian statehood as a condition for normalization with Israel. In other words, suffice with the long process you're describing and not a condition, the actual deal on the establishment of a Palestine.
While we're watching what unfolds out of the White House and wait for this press conference by the US President and Israeli Prime Minister, we're talking earlier on about the political reaction and the implications right now about what is unfolding as we speak. And Itamar Ben-Gvir weighing in just moments ago. Ariel, tell us more.
Not just Ben-Gvir, also Smotrich, Netanyahu's right-wing or far right-wing coalition partners blasting the apology call with the
well, they're not
Qatari
going to like that.
Prime Minister. Smotrich calling it a disgrace, a terrible apology. Itamar Ben-Gvir said attacking Qatar, defending the attack on Hamas leaders, the masterminds of the October 7th massacre, calling it an important, just, moral, and saying that no amount of it is time to tell the world the truth. Qatar is the country that supports terrorism, finances terrorism, and incites terrorism. No amount of money will wash terrorism away from their hands. He's not necessarily wrong, but ultimately Israel needs to present a united front when it is negotiating not only for the lives of its civilians, the lives of its soldiers, but the future of the country. So unfortunately, we're seeing politics, as politicians do, in this monumentous moment, but it does appear that this apology was a necessary frog to swallow in advancing or approaching the finish line or the beginning of the race, because there's going to be so many changes in these negotiations, but agreeing on a framework to move forward with ending the war, bringing back the hostages, disarming Hamas, removing them from power. This is a necessary first step. Netanyahu took it for national responsibility, but here we're seeing the politicians going after him.
Coalition may fall apart. And I think for Netanyahu...
Over a phone call?
Over acceptance of some terms of this deal, over the PA, over the humiliating phone call, but mainly over the very fact that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir do not want to end the war. They want to occupy Gaza, expel the population, and resettle Gaza with Jews. That's what they want. Yeah. And they're going to, some of their supporters really believe in this. So they're going to establish a campaign where they're going to run on this ticket. For Netanyahu, it's going to be very complicated to maintain his coalition together post the next election if he really is at such loggerheads. But I think he is currently assuming that if he does this deal, the coalition will, one way or another, fall apart by the end of the year.
I think that to be more direct, if there is today agreement, while we got signs of apology with the phone call that I see now, scandals in Israel concerning the way Bibi Netanyahu did it from both sides. Those who are telling you didn't apologize from the families that lost their children, you didn't apologize from the kibbutzim, and you are going to apologize from the leader who brought money to build this terror group which fight against you. In my opinion tonight, if there is agreement, there will be an earthquake in the Israel political, let's say, situation, and it will not be for a long time to see a difference. By the way, for the religious parties, it's a way to escape from what's going against them concerning join the religious youth to the IDF as it was not before. Now they can delay it to another period by using circumstances of this kind of earthquake because the end of this war.
That too will make it difficult for Netanyahu, because if there's one area in Israeli public life in which Netanyahu and the right wing are at a severe disadvantage, it's in the fact that the right wing has never had a majority without the Haredim since 1977, not a natural majority, and yet, and therefore they cannot impose very much on the Haredim. And about 70 to 80% of society, almost everyone who's not Haredi, hates the fact that the Haredim refuse to serve in the army.
Of course.
Yeah.
Senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has an important update.
Oh, it's not me. It's President Donald J. Trump outlining his comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. Now, I'm going to read from this statement. Under this comprehensive plan to end the Gaza war, the Gaza Strip will be de-radicalized, terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Gaza will be redeveloped to the benefit of the people of Gaza, who have suffered immensely. If both sides agree to this proposal, the war will immediately end. Israeli forces will withdraw to an agreed-upon line to prepare for a hostage release, which will take place within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement. In that time period, the first 3 days, all hostages, alive and deceased, will be returned. And in exchange for that, this plan outlines a significant release of Palestinian security prisoners, 250 sentenced to life in prison, plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October 7th. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas will commit to peaceful coexistence. Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. Now, upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip. At a minimum, aid quantities will be consistent of what was going into the Gaza Strip in January of 2025. We're talking about roughly 600 aid trucks a day. The rest of this announcement talks about the minutia of the various aid. Now, opening the Rafah crossing in both directions will also happen. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people of Gaza. This committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians with international experts, with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body dubbed the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by, guess who? President Donald J. Trump of the United States, as well as other members will be former Prime Minister of the UK, Tony Blair. This body is going to be responsible for setting the framework to handle the funding of for the redevelopment of the Gaza Strip until such a time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program as outlined in various proposals. Plan goes on, but ultimately these are the main points. We're talking about a complete end to the war, the release of all hostages within 72 hours.
Goosebumps.
A gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces, an international body to oversee the day-to-day until necessary reforms are taken by the Palestinian Authority to reintroduce it to governing the Gaza Strip. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, you will have the Palestinian Authority governing also the West Bank and also the Gaza Strip, setting the stage for potential Palestinian state, whether you like it or not. According to this proposal, a guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and other Palestinian factions comply with their obligations and that the new Gaza poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. Now, this goes in line with what was said earlier of the Lebanese model, that the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon allows Israel to use fire to go after Hezbollah. This, according to this text, would stipulate the same thing.
It was one of the Israeli first demand that has been raised from January 24, when were the discussions about a ceasefire that Israel demanded, and in a right way, to be the responsibility for the security to take it to its ends by itself. And it's some of these points was Israeli demands from the past. Some of them are really new because of the new developments.
An historic moment in this war, hearing this plan outlined as you have, and the first moment that sprung out is the return of all hostages within 72 hours
of Israel publicly accepting this
being agreed.
proposal.
And what about Hamas?
So what are they saying, or what does this deal say about Hamas? I think we described that for Hamas, anyone who wishes to seek amnesty must lay down their weapons and receive another state that will take them. I couldn't find here any specific mechanism for the disarmament of Hamas. Timeframes to demilitarization will be agreed upon between the IDF and the international peacekeeping force. So this is pretty vague, pretty up in the air, but it does stipulate this is a framework. This is what you start from. This is the starting point. This is not the finish line. This is what you work with. There are going to be many changes to this, but the changes are not going to be in the headlines, but rather in the technicalities of how each mechanism is going to be implemented. This is the vision of President Trump to end the war, a vision that, to my understanding and assessment, not only Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to accept, but also the Qataris are going to accept, and by extension, Hamas, or else they're going to find themselves even more isolated than what they are right now.
Dan.
This is a 21-point plan that was leaked a few days before, and it is equally as vague as what was leaked. Basically, the disarmament of Hamas is implied, but not stated clearly enough. The introduction of the PA is made conditional on reforms that are not detailed. Now, those reforms are almost certainly going to have to be a revision of their entire school curriculum, which ties into the de-radicalization item, and an end to the payments to the families of terrorists, essentially, so-called pay to slay, slay to pay.
Pay for slay.
Pay for slay. So the devil's in the details, for sure, and it could very well fall apart. Or you could say that the vagueness with which the issue of disarmament is addressed, which will be ripped to pieces by the Israeli right, might somehow enable this to be finessed vis-a-vis Hamas. But the danger there is precisely the Lebanon scenario. The discussions on how to disarm them continue for weeks and months and years while the plan is put into implementation. And the result is that you have some version of Hamas continuing to rule behind the scenes as an armed militia.
Well, I think the Lebanon model, at least since November 27th until today, is a pretty positive one for Israel, that it allows it to enforce its red lines, and
better
the
than it was.
framework
Not many
that I just
believe
read has that same outline.
I completely support. Not many believed at the beginning that what we are used now to hear about Israeli activities against Hezbollah, people are trying to renew, to remove things, will be after so long time from the fact that we stop or create the ceasefire with Hezbollah.
700 strikes at least.
But on the other way, the focus, we have to remember that the Lebanese government was a partner to this kind of agreement.
Yeah.
In Gaza, it will be much more complicated. It's a principle. It's too early because the reality on the ground will create the situation. I want, by your permission, to jump what I see in the screen while we are talking here. I think that the pictures that are released from the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump are pictures that shows kind of relaxed discussion, smiles, etc., like Israel is not under a tense with the United States. It means the two leaders are under, or delegations, are under kind of discussions as a friendly discussions, not as can be accepted that it will be tense, and I'm sure there are tense, but what is till now is signals from that meeting in the room is kind of talking, but under effect that the understanding, the friendship between Israel and the United States is still leading. And not by mistake now, we can say that Bibi Netanyahu is the last guy to close the circle after Trump already discussed with the others. But we have to wait to hear for the final, because the minds that Bibi Netanyahu has to cross from his point of view are not so easy. On the other hand, I think that main topic thing is that if succeed 72 hours releasing the hostages, this is something that 99% of the Israelis are waiting, watching, fighting for the last 2 years.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the heart of the nation is waiting for word, confirmation that the hostages will be coming back home. Again, it's still, in terms of devil being the details, we wait to see exactly what it entails. But certainly at first glance, it looks like this could be a tick on both sides.
Yeah, look, at first glance, when you read it on the phone, it's hard to get all the points because it's a very long text and a very narrow phone. But about the issue of path to Palestinian statehood, this is something that we need to highlight. The text reads, while Gaza redevelopment advances and when the PA reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. The United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. So this is technically not backing a Palestinian state, but creating a credible path. Now, where does this terminology echo? That was the price that the Saudis gave to Israel for normalization before October 7th, the credible pathway to Palestinian statehood. I think I read those words in this text. And so ostensibly, if Israel accepts this deal and it comes into effect, Israel has paid the price presented by the Saudis for normalization. And as the main prerequisite for normalization is not only that credible pathway, but the end of the war in Gaza, because Saudi Arabia cannot normalize relations, nor most of the countries in the region, with Israel, as long as there are daily images of death and destruction coming out of Gaza. So when you have the war in Gaza over and Israel paying the price of a credible path towards Palestinian statehood, there is nothing blocking normalization with Saudi Arabia, according to this plan. And that is why when President Trump presents this as a plan that will change the face of the region, that is what he means. And this text here explains exactly why.
And what a victory that would be for President Donald Trump, never mind the other players in the region.
It would be, no doubt about it. Not a lot of people gave him credit for being able to engineer such a thing. And yet here we are. He will have forced Netanyahu to tack to the center. He will have created a real challenge for the Israeli opposition, because if the coming years are going to be about Palestinian statehood, there needs to be a centrist and broad government in Israel. It changes the dynamic, not just in the region, but with Israeli politics, and also with the respect that America can expect to get around the world for its diplomacy. And I would add, we're talking probably not just about normalization with Saudi Arabia, but an effort to expand it to Lebanon and Syria. And here, it's very interesting to see what is happening with Ahmed Ashara.
And we're looking right now at live images on your screen at the White House. It is very clear that the leaders are about to come out just moments away. An historic moment in this war. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are set to take to the podium in just a few moments. what a time. So much speculation, so much anticipation about what they have been discussing and the implications for what this means for the people affected by this almost 2-year war. Israel is watching, the Middle East is watching, Washington is watching, the world is watching right now.
Yeah, Benita, we talked earlier about Jared Kushner participating, so we saw him walk into the room alongside Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, who did a lot of legwork in the negotiations that blew up in Doha with the Israeli strike, scrapped and rebuilt in this 21-point plan by President Trump. We also saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I think he was standing next to Vice President J.D. Vance, though I'm not sure about that. I am about the first three, and so these are the final moments ahead of the press conference. We also see Chief of Staff Tzachi Braverman of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So the teams have taken their seats, and now we're waiting for the emergence of the two leaders.
The optics here, so important for Benjamin Netanyahu, facing so much criticism, not to mention the walkout when he addressed the UN General Assembly late last week. Clearly not a great moment in terms of the global look, in terms of the cameras, but now he might get the chance to turn things around somewhat. We wait to see the announcement coming very shortly. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump set to speak at this press conference at the White House. And what a moment it is for these two leaders on the global stage.
It's a great moment for them, and I think it's a great moment for all those watching now, because even now, I'm not so convinced what will be the declaration. And maybe it's my military way of thinking to be like, not to trust what is going to be said and decided, besides two things that I mentioned at the beginning: release of the hostages, and secondly, is the way how the IDF is going to organize, because there's a lot of adventures for the future. And one thing you remind few times, Benita, where is Hamas in all this evening? If Hamas is not anyone taking its, let's say, its view, it means that Hamas is not exist as a movement that has started the 7th of October, or fulfill itself, whether it's Qatar. This is questions for the future. Now we have to solve the immediate problems, and we have to take very deep care for what to do in the coming days about it.
Well, we know Hamas will be watching, Qatar will be watching, and as you alluded to earlier, Eitan, Iran will be watching too. Ariel Osran.
Yeah, while we wait for the final seconds before Trump and Netanyahu emerge, Prime Minister's office issuing a verbatim readout of the phone call between with the Qatar Prime Minister, but that's going to have to wait.
Here they are, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump taking to the podium.